Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this virtual opening of Schlesinger Library's incredibly exciting new exhibition, Electability, Pride, Prejudice, and the Female Candidate. The exhibition is exciting to us because it's visually dynamic, it's instructive, it showcases our collections in various ways, but it also has the special excitement of being the first exhibition in our Leah Gellin Pourvu gallery since the pandemic disrupted our public programming in March of 2020. So it's been thrilling over the last couple of weeks to see the exhibition that I had read so much about and heard so much about from my colleagues coming together in 3 dimensions on the walls of that gallery. You'll hear an exciting discussion about it today, and I hope that you will also come and visit and be inspired and enraged and frustrated and excited by the history that it tells. I have a bunch of thank yous that I want to offer before I make introductions to our speakers and then skedaddle off the stage. First, I want to thank the Andrew W. Mellon Foundation. The Electability exhibition is one of the last major products of the multi-year long 19th Amendment project that Schlesinger has been engaged in to commemorate and inquire into the history that surrounds the centennial of the 19th Amendment in 2020. Susan Ware, Dr. Susan Ware, who is our first speaker this afternoon, was one of the visionaries behind that Mellon Long 19th Amendment project and served in writing the grant, has served on the steering committee, has served in selecting fellows and summer grant recipients, and now has served as the organizer of this exhibition under the banner of the broader service of being our honorary suffrage centennial historian. You will know Ware as a distinguished historian and biography who has written many books over decades centered in the collections of the Schlesinger Library. Most recently, Why They Marched, an exciting and improbable and really novel history of the suffrage movement or movements told in objects, some of the same kinds of storytelling that you'll hear in the exhibition. Susan, in opening this exhibition, will then be in conversation with a bona fide woman office holder in our Cambridge leader, Mayor Sumbul Siddiqui, now in her second term as mayor of our fair city. As she said earlier, that makes her the COVID mayor, the pandemic mayor. So it's been a particularly complicated time to be in public service. Mayor Siddiqui is a voting rights activist and is a Cambridge native, a product of Cambridge Public Schools, including Cambridge Ringe and Latin High School, and has worked with some of the voter activists who are currently organizing in Ringe and who have had an adjacency to our long 19th Amendment project. Last, I want to thank the supporters of Radcliffe Institute, including many on this call, who help us to make quality programming available widely and free of charge. So it's thanks to them that we're coming to you this afternoon. And with that, I will turn the virtual floor over to Susan Ware with gratitude.
Thanks, Jane. Delighted to be here and to be able to share my vision of the exhibit with you. A little bit more background. The exhibit was originally scheduled to open in October 2020, following directly after a suffrage exhibit timed to the centennial of the 19th Amendment. Now, obviously, the pandemic upended those plans, but for us, there was a silver lining. It meant we could finalize the exhibit already knowing the results of the 2020 election. Because surveying 100 years of women running for elective office is a daunting enough task as it is. And I drew on one of my favorite mantras from my days as a graduate advisor, which is chronology is your friend. And consequently, the exhibit is divided into 3 chronological parts. The first, 1920 to 1970, looks at the early years of women's forays into elected office. Even though electing women wasn't a high priority of the suffrage movement, small numbers of women ran for office in the years immediately afterwards. Ironically, the easiest way for women to win office was often through succeeding their late husbands when they died in office, the so-called widow's succession, or as Alice Roosevelt Longworth put it, using their husbands' coffins as springboards. But still, the numbers were small and the progress very, very slow. The second part starts in 1970, when the revival of feminism was starting to have an impact on all aspects of American society, including politics. In the 1970s, there were a lot fewer widows holding political office and a definite increase in activist women, both liberal and conservative, seeking and winning political office on their own. The National Women's Political Caucus was founded in 1971, the Eagle Forum in 1972, Emily's List in 1986. It's in this period that the ERA surges and then goes down to defeat. The third part starts in 1992 in the aftermath of Anita Hill's testifying before the all-male Judiciary Committee in the confirmation hearings for Clarence Thomas, a galvanizing event which encouraged more women to run for office. This last part stretches to the present, which gives us a chance to welcome Vice President Kamala Harris, and is obviously ongoing. While the numbers keep going up election by election, they are still nowhere near gender parity. So I think we have to think of this as a marathon, not as a sprint. So those are the general outlines, but the question is how to tell that story visually. And from the start, I had various ideas that I hoped could be translated into design features. And thanks to my team for actually making this happen. And I started in my mind with a visual image, 1937 cartoon, How High Will She Go?, of a woman on a staircase, which starts at the local level and then extends all the way up to the still unfulfilled goal of a woman president in the White House. And that image is in the slideshow we'll share with you later. The image demonstrates that women candidates have had more success lower down the electoral ladder, while finding the challenges get steeper as they move up. And in many ways, it's a perfect summation of the exhibit's larger themes. I also proposed a portrait gallery to show how many women have run for office over the past 100 years. And playing off the designation of 1992 as the year of the woman, I think this feature could be called It's Always the Year of the Woman. And here you see a range of women, 100 in all, from across the political spectrum, from the 1920s right up to the present, representing the diversity of the female candidate. But this comes with a warning. Watching this video projection, it's like eating popcorn. It's really, really hard to stop, but it's great fun, and I think you'll very much enjoy it. And finally, I asked for a timeline to circle the exhibit space and mark highlights in the story of women's quest for elected office. As a kid, I always loved timelines. Maybe that's why I became a historian. But I think it really helps to anchor the narrative historically. But I'm a biographer as well as a historian. So it was probably a no-brainer that I suggested we devote each of the 4 floor cases to a specific female candidate. And here's who I chose. Republican Congresswoman Edith Norse Rogers, whose papers are at the Schlesinger Library, awaiting a biographer, who succeeded her husband in 1925 and then built a reputation as a tireless advocate for veterans until her retirement in 1960. Congresswoman Shirley Chisholm, the first Black woman elected to Congress, who then made history by mounting a serious campaign for president in 1972. Patsy Takemoto Mink, congressional representative from Hawaii, who played especially important roles in the passage and implementation of the law we know as Title IX, which is about to have its 50th anniversary, and also in bringing an Asian Pacific Islander perspective to the 1977 Women's Conference in Houston. And finally, Sarah Palin, John McCain's running mate on the 2008 Republican ticket, an example of a new breed of conservative candidate, female and male, who have reshaped American politics ever since. So I think one clear takeaway from the exhibit is the numbers and range of women who have run for political office in the 100 years since the passage of the 19th Amendment. This is nothing new. Women have been running and winning office the whole time. This is fairly easy to document with our timeline and with posters and photographs and buttons and campaign memorabilia, all the things that we were able to pull from the Schlesinger rich resources. What proved much harder to capture is the ongoing sexism and misogyny that continues to affect every aspect of the female candidate's political career. Other than a 2008 bumper sticker that says no in huge letters to Hillary Clinton's presidential aspirations, which is on one of our walls, how do you actually show that sexism and misogyny visually? So we chose to make a short video with clips such as Geraldine Ferraro being patronized by George Bush in the 1984 vice presidential debate and her very steady response. Donald Trump stalking Hillary Clinton during a town hall forum during the 2016 presidential campaign, and Kamala Harris in 2020 asserting her right to be heard by repeatedly reminding Mike Pence, "I'm speaking, Mr. Vice President." And not to worry, what would a video about women's portrayal in the media be without Amy Poehler and Tina Fey impersonating Hillary Clinton and Sarah Palin on Saturday Night Live? The video is in the section of the gallery we call the Nook, along with a great selection of books on women in elective office for visitors to browse. And finally, what's an exhibit about electing women if you don't get a chance to express your opinions by casting a ballot? So we set up a polling place where you can vote for the female candidate you would most like to interview. And here are the women we put on the ballot: Shirley Chisholm, Hillary Rodham Clinton, Kamala Harris, Nancy Pelosi, Jeanette Rankin, Phyllis Schlafly, Margaret Chase Smith, and other. And I predict some very interesting write-in candidates. And we promise to post a running tally after the exhibit has been up for a while. So that's a general introduction to the exhibit, realizing how strange it is to do this in a virtual format of an actual real live exhibit. But it's the best I could do. And now I would like to welcome Mayor Sumbul Siddiqui of Cambridge to this virtual panel. And it's especially exciting to have her join me because thanks to early voting, as a Cambridge resident, I have already voted for her in next week's upcoming election. And in fact, early voting is one of the topics that I hope we can pursue. And I would just like to thank her so much for joining us, especially since she's in the final stages of her campaign in a city of Cambridge where politics is always complicated in so many ways. But thank you and welcome.
It's great to be here. I want to thank everyone for having me.
Well, I now get a chance to ask you questions. And here's the one I want to start with. Your personal narrative as a Pakistani immigrant growing up in public housing and attending public schools in Cambridge demonstrates a strong commitment to social justice and community engagement, from your high school activism to your work as a legal aid attorney. But deciding to run for political office takes this commitment to a new level. A lot of people are active doing the kind of career that you were leading, but not that many decide to throw their hat in the ring and run for political office. And I wondered if you could share with us what went into your decision to run for the Cambridge City Council in 2017.
Sure. For me, I think the journey getting here started really early on. And I have this distinct memory when I was a high school student at Cambridge Engine Latin, going to City Hall, and we were testifying on actually lowering the voting age in local elections. And I remember sitting there thinking and looking at that current council, and I think the mayor back then was Ken Reeves, and I was thinking, wow, this seems like a really neat job, and that's something that I'd love to do one day. And I didn't really know how I would get there. But it was in that back of my mind always. And so as I went through my journey, I moved back to Cambridge in 2014 after law school. I got re-involved in the Cambridge community. I joined a few boards. I came to learn about a lot of the issues that were impacting residents. And then in 2016, after that national election, and after I saw so much of the Islamophobia, everything that came up around the Muslim ban, that memory kept coming up. And so I decided to apply to Emerge Massachusetts, which someone told me about. And it's a nonprofit dedicated to getting women to run for office. And that was a 6-month training program. And while going through it and learning kind of the ropes of how to, I decided to run. And for me, it really came down to my background as someone who'd grown up in Cambridge, as someone who had really strong constituent service skills that I developed through being an attorney, and my interest in just broader public policy issues, various public policies that shaped my life, whether it was Head Start to affordable housing. And I wanted to combine those interests, and I felt that in elected office that would give me a platform. And so here I am 4 years later. So it was a journey, but that all of that, those early memories went into, and that early advocacy shaped my decision.
So what was it like to run as a woman and as a woman of color? And what advice would you give to other women who are contemplating running for political office?
I remember in 2017, and Cambridge has ranked choice voting, and there are 26 candidates, and it was running was fun and also challenging. I remember having to really prove that I was qualified, and I think often for men, their qualifications are assumed, but I think because of being a woman of color, I had to work twice as hard to run, to raise money, to really get my name out there, to defy people's assumptions about me. I remember getting a lot of, where are you really from? And I'd say, oh, well, I'm from Cambridge. And it'd be like, no, like, where are you really from? and so I had to fight against that. I had to, my name came up often, Siddiqui, oh, where's that from? And I think my experience, there was a good deal of ageism involved. I think people looked at my age. I was 29 at the time, and they were like, "Oh, you're a little bit too young. You don't have the experience to be in public office." And so that was defying people's expectations. And at the end of the day, I think why I connected with voters was because of the experience that I had, the track record of work that I had accomplished, even starting in high school, whether it was starting that youth council that's been around for 19 years now. And so I was able to connect to voters despite some of the things that came up. But I remember really had to put myself out there and do that work. And I think my advice really to women who want to run is to think about the why. And why you want to run for office. I think it's important to be authentic and grounded in that. Yes, I think you'll have to refer to your issue expertise and your accomplishments because I think inherently people will doubt your qualifications. But I have found that staying true to my beliefs and keeping my why at the center of my campaign has been the most effective strategy. And I do always feel like I need to talk about the fact that I have a law degree, for example, to establish my qualifications. And I think people are really pleased about that fact. But at the end of the day, I didn't get elected because of that. I think I've been getting elected because I listen to and connect with residents and put relationships first. So if you stay true to your why, I think it will make you more confident and grounded in your campaign.
Well, not only did you get elected, you also were chosen as Cambridge mayor. And I wondered, I know this is a really hard question, but if you had to point to one single accomplishment and realizing that your career is going to go on for many more years, so you'll have a chance to revisit this later, but so far, what are you most proud of during your tenure so far?
I think I'm proud of the last 19 months through being mayor through COVID. I got inaugurated January 6th, and I was chosen unanimously by my colleagues. And I think it was a curveball, but I think I'm really just proud of my team and everything we were able to accomplish to help people, whether that was, we launched a guaranteed income pilot called Cambridge Rise, to the work I've done as chair of the school committee, because in Cambridge, the mayor also chairs the school committee. So that work, being on a school committee during a pandemic, no easy feat. And so those are I think the top ones that come to mind. And I think the residents, have been amazing throughout this really uncertain process, but it's been an honor to serve.
Well, when I introduced you, I mentioned that, the whole process of early voting. And I wondered if practices like early voting or same-day registration have the potential to affect women voters differently than men, and also whether they have the potential to possibly help women candidates overcome some of the hurdles they still face because of gender. And I'm thinking especially of the issue of turnout, which for a city like Cambridge, which does off-year elections, is a huge one. Do you think there's a gender dimension to this, or you just want to get as many voters out and as many candidates as possible?
I do think that voting accessibility is a gender issue. I think we know that childcare is often the responsibility of women. Let's say a mother or single caretaker has to drop their child off, go to work, pick up that child, make them dinner. It's not easy to vote between 8 a.m. and 7 p.m. on just one election day. I've encountered, I remember 2 years ago, there was a mother who wanted to vote, and she just couldn't, because she couldn't leave her child, and it was that circumstance. And so I think inherently providing more voting days and promoting voting by mail, I think will help reduce the barriers that people, especially women, face. And I think voting accessibility also helps women candidates because it can bring new voters into the conversation. I think one reason so many men are in office all over the country is because over 90% of incumbents win re-election. So it's hard to chip away at the imbalance of gender since most people in office right now are men. And when you make voting easier, my opinion, and more people are able to participate in elections, you really give first-time candidates, who are often women, a better chance to win. And I think in Cambridge, this is the first time we're seeing how it'll be the first time we've done vote by mail and early voting. So I am curious to see how it does affect turnout. But already I've just heard from so many people who have said having these options, it just makes it just much more accessible than it has in the past. And I think, right now we're in the third day of early voting with 3 locations across the city open every day this week, other than that Sunday. And so I'm happy that we were able to, these are some things from the pandemic that hopefully we'll be able to stay.
Yeah, no, I'm really curious to see when the results come in, which of course, since we're in Cambridge, will not be right on Tuesday night. It may take a while, but just to see how this works out. I have one more question for you before we go into our general questions, which is that nationwide, we have seen concerted efforts to make it harder rather than easier for American citizens to vote. And I wondered which trends you are most concerned about and what you think have been some of the most successful strategies for countering these efforts.
Yeah, I think one trend that I'm extremely concerned about is people's disillusionment with voting. I think if it is harder to vote, and I don't see any reason that one candidate winning would impact my life, then why would I make that effort to cast a ballot? And I've heard that being in office, and I think I've encountered and I've asked people, why don't you vote? And I think it's a theme that's come up is people have felt like government is not working for so many people, and it makes it really difficult to convince people honestly that one candidate winning will change their life for the better. And I think when people become disillusioned about democracy and don't vote, it erodes democracy even further. And so I think I've been really worried about that downward spiral. And I think a part of that, a solution, is around voter education. It's about talking about what change looks like at the local level. And I think voter turnout in local elections, including Cambridge, is low. And I think a big piece of that is that people are not aware of what candidates, who the candidates are, what they align with, and what the local officials actually do. So I try to always point to concrete examples. I think it's amazing what our high school and this generation is doing around voter education. There's mock elections going on at the Her Vote Club, and has been doing so much advocacy around making it easier to vote, spreading information about how to register to vote. So I think some of that really starting early is key. I think if you make, think about influencing the younger generation really, really early, and I'm talking middle school too, then that education part of it, that advocacy, they learn about it really early on. And so I would love to see more civic education in our schools. I think we're getting there, but we're very, very behind on that. And so those are some things I'm concerned about, and I see that often when during especially campaign season, but even before. I think the engagement on why I should vote and why it matters is something that is ongoing education that I've been thinking about.
Well, and of course, you realize you're part of this by giving an example or serving as a role model so that young people, male and female, across a range of backgrounds can actually visualize themselves in elective office and really making the kind of important changes that you have dedicated your career to. So thank you for that. Now, before we move into the Q&A, we're going to give you a chance to view some of the images from the electability exhibition. And after this brief slideshow, which I think runs a little bit under 2 minutes, we will all return for audience questions. So with that, well, I hope you enjoyed that selection of images. It's hard to pick out which ones. I'm rather partial to the potholder. I don't know if anybody uses potholders anymore. And I love the Ferraro poster because I have my very own same poster from 1984 that a friend brought to me from the 1984 Democratic Convention that has been on the door to my study ever since. And so seeing it have pride of place in the exhibit is just so much fun and very satisfying for me. So now we get to move into the question part of this. And we already have one question from an undergraduate who sent this message to the mayor, thanking her for her service and representation of women. And the student is working on her undergraduate thesis on the impact of the double-bind theory on women presidential candidates, which I will explain, or she explained. If women are silent or undistinguished, they'll be ignored. But if they're outspoken or too distinguished in any way, they will be dismissed as being too radical. So, Mayor Siddiqui, what are your thoughts on this theory and its role in limiting the political ambitions of women?
Well, I think, I think the theory, I think there could be some folks who, I think we've seen this happen, and with our Vice President Harris, we've seen this happen with Hillary Clinton. I think there's some truth to the theory, and I also think that we have had a handful of amazing candidates who have spoken out, and they've really done a great job of bringing attention to really important issues. I look at so many of our congresswomen who are true advocates in a way that I just haven't seen such issues, whether it's student debt, the list goes on, that have been brought to the forefront. And I think women have been able to do that, and I don't think it's limited them or their ambitions. So there's some truth to that, and there's, I think, a lot of examples in the last 5 to 10 years that women have actually, I think, despite some of these criticisms, they've been able to really bring attention to some key issues.
So my bad, I forgot to remind people in the virtual audience that you can use the Q&A feature on the bottom of your screen to pose questions, and you can either direct them to the mayor or to me or to both of us. And there seems to be one for me, which is, can I say something about women represented in the exhibit who ran for local office, school board or city council, the less well-known women you selected to bring to our attention. And that was very much something we needed to balance in the exhibit. We didn't want to just look at women in Congress or women running for national office, because that's just the tip of the iceberg. Where politics and campaigning happens for women is often at the local level. And so that is a very important part of the story. It's the first couple of rungs on that image of the staircase that we're using as our overarching theme. And women who were local representatives in the Maine state legislature or on city councils or city mayors are well represented in the slideshow. And we've considered that when we're talking about diversity, it's not just about the race or ethnicity of a candidate or what part of the country that they were from. It's what is the level of political office that they run for. But it has been true all along that there are many more women who participate at the lower levels. And as you move up the food chain, it gets harder and harder for women. So they're there. And with our gratitude for their being part of that story. So, okay, here's another one for you, Mayor. Expanding voting rights and access. Oh no, we've already basically talked about that one. Let's see, here's another one. What are your thoughts about women candidates responding or not to misogynistic attacks? How can women candidates and their supporters respond to these attacks in a way that frames a positive force for the candidate? A lot of finesse, I would imagine, but how would you answer that?
Yeah, I think there's a way to do it, and I've certainly done it. And I think you have to, again, be authentic and truthful, and call, I think, always call something out if it's problematic. I think there's been situations where I think about meetings that I had last term, and it was, some of the stuff was very subtle. And I think that's where there's room for some education too. And an example I'll use is, I remember distinctly, I'd make a point and then a male colleague would make the same point. And then the other male colleague would say, that's a great idea. And I'd have to say, I actually am the one who mentioned that point, and people would, just, it'd be like, oh, sorry. And so there'd be I had a lot of conversations with some of my colleagues around kind of how they were in the meetings. And so I think I responded, they weren't attacks, right, per se, but they were more, it was very subtle, but, very problematic as well. And so I kind of, that's how I've dealt with some of in my personal speaking. But I think how other women candidates do it, actual misogynistic attacks, I think there is a way to do it, and I think it's important to respond.
Yeah, no, I'm afraid what you described is something that many women have experienced in whatever profession or work situation they are in. But I do think it's important to speak up and call it out. Well, there's a question that came in for me. Was there something that surprised you while you were looking through the Schlesinger's collections? Did any particular item affect what you knew about women running for office? And I'm not sure any particular item that I can point to, but I did really start to notice when I was helping to assemble all of the photographs for our portrait gallery, that especially for the early candidates, the women whose pictures were in black and white from the 1920s through the 50s and 60s, so many of the women candidates were wearing corsages. Now, I noticed, Mayor, you are not wearing a corsage today, but these pictures would have this huge thing that looked like it had landed on their shoulder. And I think that was part of being a woman candidate and showing your femininity as well as your political cred. Blessedly, there aren't so many corsages anymore. But one thing that we really noticed when you see the portrait gallery and you watch it all the way through is the number of women candidates wearing pearls. And it is really striking. It's not just the older ones earlier in the century. It's really up to the present. And we were so struck by this that we thought about organizing some kind of like treasure hunt for whoever can spot the largest number of pearls in the video could get some kind of award. And I even thought about, should I wear pearls today to, in solidarity with these women candidates, but I didn't think I could pull it off. But I think that was interesting to me, and also suggested this fine line that even in 2020, women candidates are having to walk. So, all right, here's another question for the mayor from someone, I bet from Cambridge and Latin. So glad you called out #her vote. I'd love to hear more about youth voter advocacy. Are there efforts making voting cool for young people in a way that will pay off later? What a great question.
So this year, if you vote early in person or on election day, you'll get a sticker, a newly designed sticker. And that sticker has been designed by a CRLS high school student. So this year, with my office, the Election Commission, and students at the high school, there was a contest for I voted stickers. And so I think it was to make it much more inclusive. So this year, the stickers in the top, I think 7 languages in Cambridge. And so it's a newly designed sticker. And I think doing that was really, I think it was really fun. And I think fun for the students, and the whole student body got to vote on the sticker. And I think that was one way, but that was a cool way to kind of bring up voting and why, it's important to vote and so forth. So I think along with her vote, that was something fun that we were able to do this year.
And sort of following through on that, obviously you've done a lot of work in Cambridge encouraging this kind of advocacy among high school students. What else have you been able to do to give a hand up or support to aspiring candidates? I mean, I'm sure people reach out to you and ask your advice. Without sharing any private details, but how does that process of mentoring and encouragement work? Because it must have been important to you, and probably it came from both men and women.
Yeah, no, definitely. I think I was very much encouraged by folks in elected office, whether it was Marjorie Decker, who I met when I was a high schooler, and she was a counselor. And to now, if there's students who reach out to me who are interested, I will always have a conversation. Even other candidates too who are running, who want to sit down and talk about any advice. My door is always open. I want to talk to people who want to be involved in the communities and want to run for office, and give them kind of the advice of here's what I would do and here's what I wouldn't do. But it's important really to set that path and mentor people so that they can one day come and fill your shoes as well. And so, because I'm not always going to be on the council. And so kind of educating the younger generation and helping those who are interested in a journey in public office is critical. And I think we need to do much more of it.
Yeah. I think one of the questions that's come in through the Q&A is about the relation between women who were path breakers in non-elected office holding, like women in state governments, elected or appointed rather than elected, and what role they played in helping to encourage women to run for political office. And I think this is part of a larger story of just this attempt in the years after suffrage was won for women to get a toehold in the political system. And in some ways, it was easier in the 20s, 30s, and 40s to be appointed to political office than it was to be elected to political office, just because the political parties were not exactly welcoming of women candidates. They were quite happy to have women do all of the scut work and the canvassing and raise the money, but running them for office, no. But I do think that having, for example, the women that I looked at in the New Deal, Frances Perkins, the best example, having them be such competent and well-respected leaders is part and parcel of this ongoing attempt to show that, yes, women are quite capable of holding any position that they aspire to, and let's make sure that we can give them the opportunities to make those contributions. But alas, just having an occasional outstanding woman in government, unless you have a pipeline, unless you pass it along, that progress can evaporate. So I think we always need to be vigilant, and it's going to be both elected office and appointed office, and our work will never be done, I'm sure. So let's see. Do we have any thoughts on women candidates and office holders and their use of social media? Thinking especially of AOC's use of Instagram. Social media is a notoriously complicated place. I'm paraphrasing the question. To be a woman, and also still maybe not a forum that's always taken seriously, but if you want those youth voters, it's just, is it part of our life from now on in campaigning? Must be part of yours.
I think it's important and it's effective, especially for the younger voters. I have an active social media, but I think behind the curve compared to AOC and others, because I think it's a complicated place, and guarding your time, guarding your kind of sanity as well, because people are always on so many different mediums, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram. There's so many messages from everyone, and it can be a lot. So I do use it. I haven't gotten a TikTok or anything. I think some youth did encourage me to get a TikTok. I think I have one. I just haven't posted anything yet. But so it is something that I am constantly thinking about, of how do we reach more people and engage them to learn about what is going on in the city. And I think Instagram has helped. Whenever I've gone to a classroom at the high school, I end up, everyone has Instagram, and so they end up following me, and it's great. I think it's an effective tool, and I think it's not necessary, but I think it's becoming more and more critical to engagement.
Well, it's an issue that came up when I was out on the suffrage hustings during the centennial, because people would say, well, how did the suffragists run their campaign without social media? And what I would basically say was they were using the same up-to-date techniques, the newest things to get their messages across. And if they were alive today, I'm sure they would be on Instagram and Twitter and all these things, because this is what you have to do. It's part of the history. So I'm keeping an eye on the time. Did have one question a while ago about the use of first names for candidates who only call themselves by their first names. And, as a historian, when I write and when I edit things, I always insist on not calling women by their first names, because we don't call men by their first names. And I wondered if you had a view on that.
I don't have a view on that. I think it's a choice, right? So I think if some women are more comfortable with just using their first name, I think that's completely fine. I think for me personally, with a last name, there's history there that I think I often get asked about, and I think most people will refer to me as Mayor Siddiqui, and I think Sumbul Siddiqui. I think some people have just said just vote Sumbul, but I always kind of try to talk about my last name and so forth. So I don't really have for me, it's a personal choice.
Well, I'm afraid we're not going to have time to talk about the last question, but it's one that's very much on the minds of Boston voters, which is the upcoming election next week. It's not just Cambridge that's having an election, so is Boston, and it's been very interesting in all kinds of ways. And I'm hoping that this discussion that we have been part of will help people put some of what's going on in a larger historical context. And as we wrap up our program today, obviously it takes a village to put together an exhibit or a webinar like this. And one person I really would like to call out is Patricia Liu, who is our researcher, who was, as a Harvard undergraduate, was so helpful in gathering material for the timeline, and also did so much in finding the photographs for the portrait gallery, and it really made our life much easier, and we thank her very much. And I think with that, that really concludes our program for today. I want to thank Mayor Siddiqui for our fascinating conversation, and our audience for their terrific questions. I wish we'd had more time, but I think that's the nature of the beast. Today's program has been recorded and will be posted on the Radcliffe website. And now that you've heard so much about it, we certainly hope you'll visit Electability, Pride, Prejudice, and the Female Candidate in the Pourvu Gallery at the Harvard Radcliffe Institute. The exhibition is free and open to the public, but first you need to visit the Radcliffe website, which is www.radcliffe.harvard.edu, to register to visit before coming to campus because of COVID restrictions on numbers of people.